Woo! It is time for your monthly Patreon only, and we are closing out the month with one of my favorite subjects. It's time for that monthly Star Trek update, baby, where we do a whole episode just for the Sovryn Tech patrons that is reviewing everything that's going on in the world of Star Trek. You know, I'll tell you, I mean, there's a few Star Trek podcasts out there. I actually don't like any of them. Well, except for the official Star Trek podcast is pretty good, but that's really good because they can get like all the big stars and, you know, producers. I mean, because it's official, it's actually, you know, kind of co-run by Paramount and CBS. You know, they can do a lot more interesting things with it. So there's a good reason that one works. Even though I don't listen to it terribly religiously, but anyway, there's not a lot of great Star Trek podcasts out there. You know, I mean, that's an opportunity I'm pretty sure I could really take advantage of. I'm not going to. I really don't have the time right now. I'm still trying to get User off the ground and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, it's something I could do. But for now, you get it. You get me as a patron, you know, and thank you for being a patron, of course. You get me once a month, at least, talking about Star Trek. And we've got a lot to talk about this month, that being November 2017. And we'll talk about the mid-season finale for Star Trek Discovery that happened. And then we will, which I think that Into the Forest I Go was the name of it. Right now, as of middle of November, we are in a bit of a hiatus until January 7th, 2018. Then that will help. They'll finish up the season for Star Trek Discovery. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what's happening in the Star Trek, the first Star Trek Discovery comic series, The Light of Kahless. I mean, it's a mini series, but that started just yesterday, which is one of the reasons I waited until today to do the Star Trek update, because I wanted to talk about that, what that comic series was looking like. We'll also talk about something that was my pick for comic series of 2016, and honestly, it could still be my pick for 2017. We will talk about Star Trek Boldly Go. I think that this comic is just fantastic. We're going to talk, I mean, there's some really, really big stuff that has happened in it. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then we are going to get into something I could probably do for a Prime episode, but I'm not going to. We will review the final two episodes, episode 10 and episode 11 of Star Trek Continues. Yes, they are the last episodes that they will be making, at least as of right now. And wow, I mean, well, I'll save it for when we get to it. So we got a lot to cover, and I mean, that's just for starters. I'm sure some other stuff will creep in. Speaking of things creeping in, if you haven't gotten into this now, I am not like, okay, so understand a little bit about me. I don't really consider myself a minimalist in any way, but I guess just by default somehow I could be considered that. I don't know. And look, I'm not praising minimalism like it's some kind of grand wonderful thing, okay? But I'm a guy who, I own digitally, I have tons of shit. Thousands of games that I've purchased over the years, that are all available, on Steam or GOG or whatever. Books, I've got to be kissing, like the 7 digits as far as the amount of books that I have on various hard drives. I mean, it's just fucking insane. I have thousands upon thousands of comic books. I mean, I have tons of stuff. So, I mean, that's why I find it's kind of hard to call me a minimalist. I actually have a ton of shit. Okay. But it's all digital. Now, physically, I don't have a whole lot, and I don't want a whole lot physically, frankly. Like, the bulk of my possessions you generally see whenever you're looking into the BDSM studio. And I have it there in, a lot of it I've acquired to really, just to spruce up the BDSM studio, even though much like Sherlock Holmes, I only hold on to things that have sentimental value or stuff that's really like inspirational to me. And I got to tell you, recently I saw something that, wow, I mean, did it blow my mind? So Eagle Moss, which is this company, they have the rights to make collectibles for certain franchises. They have like Aliens vs. Predator, I think Doctor Who, they have some others, and one of them is Star Trek. And they've been doing, for a few years now, they've been doing what's called the Starship Collection, where like once a month, and these are very premium collectibles. They're not shipping you Micro Machines, okay? Like, I actually thought that that's more or less what they were doing until I actually got my hands on them, and I was like, wow, this is really impressive what they're doing. I think they're up to, like, I don't know, their 100th issue of what they put out there. And like each little ship that they send out comes with a little magazine that explains and gives the history of the ship and, you know, the production, all that different stuff. It's really cool. So they had announced in the, like, I guess end of October, they announced that, we're going to release the refit of the NX-01, which is, you know, the Enterprise from the show Enterprise, you know, Captain Archer's ship. And the refit, a lot of people might not know about this, okay, especially if you only passingly watch, Star Trek. The refit is, so Doug Drexler, who's one of the main designers and starship designers for the Star Trek franchise overall, you know, he's worked on most of the shows. I mean, just a top-notch, really an artisan in my opinion, not just an artiste. And he came out with what he said, if Enterprise got a season 5, they would have done some upgrades to the ship. And he actually did up an entire design of what that refit Enterprise would look like, which makes sense because, I mean, when you consider that, you know, the original Enterprise, the NCC 1701, you know, from the original series, I mean, I guess the NX-01 is kind of the original Enterprise, though maybe the XCV 330 would actually be the original Enterprise. Depends how far you want to go. But, you know, that got its major refit in Star Trek The Motion Picture, which stuck through to the 1701A, which is probably the best-looking Enterprise ever. I mean, like, that is such a stunning ship. So, anyway, the theory goes is that if there was going to be a Season 5 of Enterprise, they would have upgraded the ship. And there's a few good reasons why this actually would have happened. Because, for one, you know, one of the original ideas, and it's a pity, because now I think Netflix would have done it, but, you know, 12 years ago or whenever, when Enterprise was canceled, you know, the idea is that, well, hey, Netflix, you want to turn this into a TV show? We know you're getting into original content. Star Trek would be a great place to go. It really is a shame because, I mean, I think now if 2005 was now, Netflix really would have done it. But whatever. Anyway, so what they would have had to do is they would have had to, you know, they wouldn't have had all the set design and everything from Paramount or from CBS, and they would have had to, you know, they probably would have had to do a major redesign. So, you know, because they'd have to build all new sets if they were going to do a season 5 for the show. And I think that, I mean, that would have been a simple way to explain it, is that, well, we still have the NX-01, nothing happened to it, but we did a huge redesign on it. And so that way you could build all new sets, you know, for the show. So this would have happened. Anyway, Eagle Moss, and they're not the first ones. I actually, Polar Lights originally, which is the model company, a few years ago, they came out with a model that you could build. And I don't mind building models. It's something I'm kind of over, but I get it. Like I really understand the appeal to it. So, you know, I'm not knocking model building. But anyway, they had a model of it that you could buy. There were like wooden ones that you could get on eBay of everything, of this refitted version of the NX-01 that Doug Drexler prototyped. And what it is, it looks exactly like, you know, the NX class ships. Okay, it looks exactly like the NX-01. It's just they added on a secondary hull that makes it look like a Constitution class. You know, more like a Constitution class, but it's a little slimmer. It's a great look. Like, it looks so badass. You can look it up. You go to some image search or something, and you can type in a refit NX-01, and you'll see exactly what it looks like. Maybe I'll use a picture of the model for the cover art for this episode. Anyway, I ended up pre-ordering it. I was like, oh, fuck yeah, I'll take it. You know, because I think it's just one of the most gorgeous designs. And I'm a big fan, and I've talked about this actually in recent Q&A episodes where somebody had asked, you know, if you wanted to start reading Star Trek novels, where would you start? One of my recommendations was that if you were at least a fan of Enterprise, the Enterprise sequel novels, like the Rise of the Federation story, the Romulan War stories and all that, are tremendous. They're great novels, some of the best Star Trek novels out there. And in those, they use the refit NX-01, you know, the refit NX class. And so that's why I thought it'd be so cool to, like, finally have a physical representation of this ship, even though it's, you know, been a wallpaper on my computer a million times or whatever. But they actually have a beautiful, I mean, and this is huge. This thing's got to be approximately 9 inches long or so. I mean, just a stunning model that they did. And again, it has a secondary hull. They also put the little pointies on the tips of the nacelles, of the warp nacelles, much like what would like the later class, like the Daedalus class. And I think didn't the Cage, the Enterprise and the Cage, I thought maybe it had little pointers on it. Anyway, maybe Robert April's version of the Constitution class had little pointers, little tips on the warp nacelles. So it's gorgeous. It's a very nice touch. It's a beautiful model. Eagle Moss does fantastic work. They offer all kinds of, like the deep cuts, I shall say. The deep cuts of starships that they make available are wild. Now, not all of them are special editions. Most of them are only about 4 inches long. That's like the monthly starships that they put out there. But even those are usually die cast with some plastic, of course. But they're very well done, because I also acquired a model of the Prometheus, the USS Prometheus, and that's the more standard monthly starship that they come out with. It's not the big version like the 9-inch NX-01 refit, but just a beautiful, I mean, just gorgeous. Like, and it has a great feel to it. I was very pleased, and I love the Prometheus, which is arguably, as far as what we've seen on TV, minus some ships from like, I love the the Wells class for like the USS Relativity from Voyager and all that. But as far as what we've seen within the 24th century, it's about the most advanced Federation starship in the 24th century. It's the one that can like split into 4. And they actually just started releasing a book series in the U.S. About the Prometheus. At least it's going to be a trilogy anyway, which I'm intrigued to read that. But it just came out, and it's not an audiobook, so I have to read it the old-fashioned way, and that takes me a little more time, as to where usually if it comes out as an audiobook, I can report on it within the same day, because I can listen to it in about 5-6 hours. But anyway, I'll be reading those, and we'll talk about them in a future Star Trek update. So yeah, Eagle Moss, boy, if you want to check them out, I mean, they are doing this is some stunning, the starships they make are easily the best production models I've seen, in collectibles that I've seen come out of anything. I mean, I love the Micro Machines. Don't misunderstand me. Micro Machines were, I mean, that was such a huge deal back in the 90s. I mean, fuck, they even had Babylon 5 Micro Machines. That's amazing. They had Babylon 5, Star Wars, and Star Trek. What more could you want? Yeah, I know. If Stargate Micro Machines made sense, that would have been great, but it didn't make sense. Not at the time, anyway. Anyway, yeah, I'm really, really pleased with this. Just seeing this gorgeous. Right now, it's gracing the desk of the BDSM Studios. It's right next to my mixer, and my Behringer mixer here, and it just looks great. So okay, let's talk about Star Trek Discovery. How about that? So we've reviewed Star Trek Discovery, frankly, a few times already. We've talked about a few of the episodes, the season openers, or the show openers, I should say. We've covered them on Sovereign Tech Prime even. So I'm really only going to talk about the later episodes, or the later part of the mid-season, I guess I should say, because again, we're not going to get the entirety of season 1 until January, when it picks back up on January 7th. Now, they are interestingly calling this like Chapter 1, like the 9 episodes that we've seen so far. CBS is calling it Chapter 1 of Season 1. Okay, whatever. That's fine. We did talk about, we've talked about in previous Star Trek updates, and please, there's just going to be spoiler alerts across the board. So if you haven't watched the shit, go watch it. Or if you don't care about spoiler alerts, then you're like me. I don't give a shit about spoiler alerts, or, I don't give a shit about spoilers. Spoil it away, because I still need to watch it. I still want to see it. So if you don't care about that, well, then great. You can keep on listening. We talked about the theory that Ash Tyler, who is the guy that Captain Lorca, the supposed Starfleet officer that Captain Lorca brought with him back from Klingon captivity, and the potential, the possibility that Ash Tyler is actually Voq, the Klingon Voq that took over, or that was named the successor for T'Kuvma, who ends up dying, which we're going to talk about T'Kuvma later. As far as Klingons go. And, so the latter half of the season, like when you get into more of there was the episode, was it Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, where Harry Mudd comes back and all this, and he's like wearing that Andorian helmet and everything. I mean, just bottom line, I was very pleased with the latter parts of this mid-season. I don't have any real beef with anything that was going on. I thought it was kind of cool I know a lot of people have been complaining about the fact that, these humans seem a little too conventional, a little too contemporary for our own time. They're having parties, listening to, I don't know, what were they listening to, the Fugees or something like that, whatever they were listening to during that party, and that they say fuck and all this different stuff. I've had absolutely no problem with any of that. I think that just more goes to show just how a cut above, the fact how human these people act. I feel like just shows how cut above, say, the crew of the Enterprise, the NCC 1701 that you deal with in the original series, captained by, of course, Captain Kirk, just how much a cut above they were as far as Starfleet goes. That kind of bullshit wasn't happening on Kirk's ship, because you get a lot of that he was really not really like super strict, but that he was a real stickler and wanted the best and blah, blah, blah. And you get the real sense that in the original series now, that's exactly what you're getting. So I don't mind it. I think that this, and it also plays into the thing set up in the Star Trek Discovery novel Desperate Hours by David Mack, where in that they make the case that like the Constitution class program is, really for the best of the best. Okay, so if you're getting on lesser for lack of a better phrase, lesser starships, not that the Discovery is necessarily a lesser starship. Of course, we're still figuring out kind of the mystery around its production and what the deal is with it. But when you deal with that, then it makes sense that these people are, a little more lax, a little more laid back perhaps with the rules and all of this. So yeah, I don't mind it. I don't mind it one bit. That's how things are going. Interesting stuff happening. Like, I know there's a ton of complaints about Captain Lorca, that Captain Lorca doesn't act like a Starfleet captain. He's not one of the good guys, blah, blah, blah. We're still seeing how much he's just not one of the good guys through the later part of the season. And again, that's still totally fine with me because we have total precedent, especially in the original series, of Starfleet captains that are not good guys. They are bad people. They can break. They have issues. Blah blah blah. So whatever. That's all of that's been working out fine. Harry Mudd has been a very fun and interesting character throughout it. I really enjoyed that episode, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. It was especially nice to deal with an episode that didn't have to necessarily deal with the Starfleet Klingon War or the Federation Klingon War. That was enjoyable. And then there was the episode which was after that, actually, which would be episode 8, where they end up going to this planet that you find out is pretty much like there's this advanced species, but it's all over the planet. Like it's in the trees, it's in all this different shit. I didn't really have a problem with that. Of course, now they're creating a romantic relationship between Ash Tyler and Michael Burnham. And of course, if those two, if we could very easily find out that Ash Tyler, is just going to end up like probably, they're going to be having sex. Him and Michael will be having sex, and then he'll end up like stabbing her or something. That's probably what's going to happen. And he's going to say it's in, vengeance for T'Kuvma. And of course, Michael Burnham won't die. She'll live on, but that I'm expecting that hook really to happen, because I am kind of buying into more and more that Ash Tyler, something's not right. Something's really not right. And you get that more in not so much in the episode 8, where they end up going, where they're on this forest planet with this communications array. But in episode 9, when L'Rell, which was like Voke's potential love interest and second in command with the Klingons, when she ends up getting captured by the humans, then you're finding out that, oh shit, like you're seeing all these terror situations. Like Ash Tyler starts having flashbacks during the mid-season finale, which is Into the Forest I Go. In that he starts having flashbacks of like all these terrible things happening. We even saw, and I thought this was amazing, we saw L'Rell's tits. Like we saw full-on Klingon tits. That might, you could think of like Lursa and B'Etor, right, where they have like the big open chests and everything. But full out, all out, no armor on, no bra, whatever, just tits out. I was like, wow, Stephanie and I, we were watching it. We're just going, holy shit. Oh, okay, great. This is awesome, even though it's like seemingly a tragic thing. But it looked like he was getting tortured, but maybe more he was actually being surgically altered, like that's what was going on. And so that it is Voq. And well, we'll see. We'll see how this all works. And it doesn't appear to be like that Ash Tyler knows he's Voq. He probably was implanted with some kind of, alternate personality or something. And I mean, that's sort of the hint that you get from this. But I thought that was awesome, to go to that length, to go to that depth, to finally have some real nudity in Star Trek and to have it be alien. Nice touch. Nice touch. All the way. I say with that, let's keep that kind of thing coming. So the other thing that happens in the mid-season finale, Into the Forest I Go, there's so much cool stuff going on here. They're very much playing up, no doubt about it, and other people have commented on this, but I recognized it right away. They're really playing up on the episode, was it Aaron and Mercy of the original series, where actually, not unironically, Kor, and this was House Kor that we're taking on, Kor and Kirk confront each other. Of course, Kor being played by, the late great, and I mean great, John Colicos, where they, the Organians, which is like this advanced species, sort of bring the Klingons and humans together to try to get them to, and you end up with the Organian Peace Treaty after that, which is where, a lot of hostilities between the Klingons and the humans stop. And that's right from the original series. So, they're definitely playing up on that, where these creatures on the forest planet are trying to, are really trying to bring them. What is it? The Pavo, I think, is the name of the creatures on the planet. That's the name of the planet too. But anyway, they're bringing them together there, and it ends up being, this huge fight. Of course, it doesn't turn out as well as it does in Aaron of Mercy with the Organians. And that some of that was pretty cool. Like, when some of the cool moments that happen with the Discovery, like this ship really is, is as ugly as I don't think the ship's ugly as the effects and CGI for it are. I think the overall design is fine. Man, some of the shit it does is so cool. Like when it did a spore jump, for lack of a better term, when it did a spore jump while it was at warp, that was so cool. And then when it was spore jumping and they had to have Lieutenant Stamets, or they had to have Stamets do like 130, at the risk of his life, do 130 or 160, whatever, jumps around, so that they could map and get like an algorithm of where the cloaked Klingon ship was. Oh man, when it just kept like appearing, disappearing, and firing, that was so cool. I mean, that was fantastic. There is, I hope, at some point, I mean, we'll find out why the spore drive, either can't work anymore or what's going to happen with it, why it's not something that's known about in, say, like the 24th century. But I would love if there was some story that takes place in the future where they use it against the Borg or something. Like, that would just drive the Borg nuts. That would be so cool. I don't know. I think I talked about this in the last one. I don't mind spore drive. I know people have issues with it, scientifically. Oh, that's not possible. Blah, blah. Stop. It's fine. I think I said in the last Star Trek update, my main concern was more about how they were dealing with the Vulcan Katra. That's nuts. So, but anyway, that was really cool. I mean, so, and it's been a while since, in my opinion, since I think Star Trek could really be seen as cool and that it was doing really cool things. So it was awesome, to have that again, especially on Star Trek on TV, more particularly, where it was doing something really cool. And I thought a lot of that stuff was so cool. So very, very impressed with that last, that season closer, or that mid-season closer for Star Trek Discovery. Very much looking forward, obviously, to the rest of the season. I think this show is going in interesting places. Of course, we know now, kind of its last jump that it makes, tricking Stamets into doing it, that it ends up what seems to be another dimension. Like, because Captain Lorca starts talking about how, hey, the spore drive could take us to whole other dimensions, not just to, other places on Earth or other places in the in the Prime Galaxy or something like that. This could get really interesting with the Spore Drive. If it can do alternate universes, that'd be great if they ended up in the Kelvin timeline somehow. That would be really cool. And hell, have Captain, or have well, I guess at the time it would have been, you could have Bruce Greenwood be on as Captain Pike of the Enterprise, or something. I mean, there's a lot of options what you could, not necessarily the Enterprise, but there's a lot of options of what you could do with that, that I think would be a lot of fun. Now, Jonathan Frakes, of course, well known as Commander Riker, Jonathan Frakes is directing some episodes of Star Trek Discovery, and he apparently let the cat out of the bag a few months ago that there would be an episode of Discovery where they go to the mirror universe. Now, the question was, well, how do they get there? Well, obviously now we know the Spore Drive can actually go to alternate universes, not just alternate coordinates, or, not just far off coordinates instantaneously. So that's probably how we'll end up seeing that. I have no idea where they were at the end of the mid-season finale, but I'm okay with this. Star Trek does a good job with alternate realities. Like time travel and alternate realities, Star Trek has those really locked in, more so than any other science fiction franchise, in my opinion. And they do it in such a believable way. It's really cool. So I'm all for that. Can't wait to see more of that. Again, very impressed with where Discovery is going so far. I didn't expect to appreciate it so much, but I'm really appreciating it. And still probably my favorite character on the show is Captain Lorca. I think he is so badass. And it was funny when they're about to destroy the ship of the dead, Kor's ship of the dead. There's a point where he walks up to the view screen, Captain Lorca does, and he puts in his eye drops, because he can't handle bright lights. He puts in his eye drops, and you're just like, okay, well, that's random that he's doing that. But then you find out the reason he did it is because he knew he was about to blow up the ship, and when it blows up, he can look at it. And I was like, oh, man, that's cool. That is really cool. So, yeah, this is going to be very interesting. In fact, really, if they go to alternate universes, you might be able to bring back certain characters, like the female security officer that was originally there. You might be able to bring her back from an alternate universe and bring her back into the Prime timeline or something. I could picture a lot of different ideas where this could get just super, super interesting if we're going that route. So we'll see what happens with Discovery. Honestly, it's not even, in my opinion, right now, Star Trek Discovery isn't even the most exciting thing happening in Star Trek. It's just not. I mean, it has gravitas because it's an official Star Trek show on TV, or quote unquote on TV, depending how you're watching it, again. And that, that's great. And I think it's doing a fine job of carrying the torch. I like the differing direction that it's, that it's going in. I like the imperfect humans. I dig the whole thing. So, okay, let's talk about, I guess while we're on the subject of Discovery, let's talk about the new comic series that started for Discovery, and it's a mini series. It's only going to go a few issues. That being The Light of Kahless, Star Trek Discovery, Light of Kahless. And what this is this is really going to be telling backstory for the character of T'Kuvma, who we lose, and we didn't know we'd lose. We lose in, the first two episodes of Star Trek Discovery, which take place, about a year previous to everything else, or approximately a year previous to everything else that's happening in the show right now. So this is exploring the character of T'Kuvma, which I think is important because that gives us context as to, okay, wait a minute, why do people even bother to follow this guy, in the first place? How did he get the ship of the dead? All of that. And you get hints of what that story looks like in the, Battle of the Binary Stars. You get, there's some exploration that T'Kuvma was beat up as a kid, as a Klingon kid and all this. But this is really going into much more depth in the matter. And it's talking about his sister and kind of his family lineage and the problems with his family and everything. Was it the House of Girja or whatever? And it's pretty cool, but I mean, it's completely Klingon. There's nothing going on with Starfleet whatsoever. This is totally a Klingon story. Not that that's necessarily bad. In fact, it's kind of fun in the beginning. It takes place somewhere, shortly after the 2-hour premiere of Star Trek Discovery. It takes place on the ship of the dead while Voq is still in command of it, and the House of Kor hasn't taken it over. And Voq is there. You just see them eating a human. You're not sure what human it is. Some Starfleet officer. Maybe maybe they literally did eat Captain Georgiou, and maybe that's what they're chewing on. Though the uniform looked more. It didn't look like Command Gold. It looked more like the Bronze, which would have been an engineer or something like that. I don't know. I mean, because they had the pickings of eating from any of the carcass remains of a ship. So many ships from the Battle of Binary Stars to choose from. So it doesn't necessarily mean it was Captain Georgiou that they were eating, but they're there eating a human, and it's funny because like they're using the word ass, like they're swearing and everything. Not using, because it's all pretended to be translated in Klingon and everything. But they're saying ass, they're saying all this other stuff, right? I mean, so it's an adult comic book. They're not toning it down just because it's a comic book. And that makes sense because look, a kid's just not going to buy a Star Trek Discovery comic. They either have to be able to watch the show, which is a fairly adult show. Again, we're showing off Klingon tits, folks, like, bare flesh. You might as well make the comic adult too, and they've done a good job about that. So anyway, it was interesting. I mean, it's just the first issue that we've gotten so far, and it's exploring T'Kuvma. It's not the most engaging read whatsoever, but it's set up. You can tell that it's set up, and that we're going to get something good here, hopefully in the next few issues that could be very interesting. Stories about Klingon triumph, those are going to be pretty fucking awesome. I mean, just look at a lot of stories around Worf and whatever. So yeah, Light of Kahless, I think it's going to end up being a worthy read. I like the direction they're going. I'm glad they're not dumbing anything down. And this is also more or less canon. And I say more or less because, kind of the verbiage they've been using around whether or not the extraneous materials for Star Trek Discovery are canon or not. Initially, they were saying, yes, the books are canon, the comics are canon, what happens in them matters to the rest of the series. But then they kind of backed off and said, well, they're sort of canon until they're not, and blah, blah, blah. Well, anyway, I'm treating them as canon, and I will, if it gets to the point where something gets contradicted, I will properly yell at the Star Trek writing team if I ever meet them and say, this is really like shitty what you're doing to fans here. So, but they seem to have their act together, so I don't think that that's necessarily going to happen. So, the Star Trek Discovery comic, I mean, yeah, it's cool. Give some backstory. That's fine, and because you can't, I don't know how much you can do looking forward, especially when you have such a mystery right now. During season one, you kind of have to play it a little safe. This is like we were talking about on this month's Star Wars update that came out actually yesterday. I'm recording this on November 30th. Yesterday we were talking about how it seems like, Disney has to really play it safe, and they have to stick very close to what's happening. Say, like, it seems like they're really concentrating on the time frame between, episode 3 and maybe a little bit after episode 4, but they won't go any further than that. And it's probably because it's the one area where they feel comfortable telling stories that don't give away some kind of big hook that we're going to end up with during The Last Jedi. Clearly, the very same thing is happening in many ways with Star Trek Discovery, because when we have the announcement of the new book, there's going to be another book. Well, obviously, there's going to be a ton of books for Star Trek Discovery, as long as it stays successful. Which again, we already have season 2, so it's probably doing pretty well. But the second novel for Star Trek Discovery, which comes out in February 2018, that is also a prequel. Like, it is something that takes place, gives backstory to the events of Star Trek Discovery. So they're sticking pretty close with doing prequels and all that, and it's fine. As long as you enjoy that sort of thing, it's fine. And I enjoy that sort of thing, so I love it. But anyway, so yeah, that's our review of issue number 1 of Light of Kahless, the Star Trek Discovery comic, which when the series is finally all done, I'll probably do a review then. Maybe I'll briefly mention it on other Star Trek updates. So, okay, let's move on from that. And I guess while we're still talking comic books, let's talk about other comic books. The Star Trek Waypoint series did end. I don't think they planned on it ending. I just don't think that it was necessarily selling. Like, the people weren't getting on board with it for whatever reason. But now it's being treated like a miniseries, and trade paperback will probably be out eventually. I'll do a review of the Star Trek Waypoint series maybe in December's Star Trek update, because there won't be a whole lot getting released. There won't be new episodes of Discovery or anything like that coming out in December. So maybe I'll save that for that. But what I do want to review is, oh man, Star Trek Boldly Go. Okay, this is the comic book series that takes place after Star Trek Beyond, after the Kelvin Timeline movie Star Trek Beyond, which was also, I voted as movie of 2016. I mean, because it was so goddamn good. It's crazy how great that movie was. So so Star Trek Boldly Go. Now, there was a previous comic book series that I've recommended to just about everybody that was just called Star Trek by IDW, and it had to do with the adventures in the Kelvin timeline, after the 2009 film, after Into Darkness, and led all the way up to Star Trek Beyond. This Star Trek Boldly Go references storylines and characters and things that happened in the, what I'll call the original Kelvin Star Trek comic. And so this is a direct sequel. Now, I've said this over and over again. I haven't really ever heard an official statement on how canon the IDW Star Trek Kelvin Timeline comics are, but events that happen in the comic books and the comic books alone get mentioned in the movies, in all three movies, actually. I guess two, because, in the first one there wasn't any previous universe to that, really. So, but it gets mentioned in the movies. So I've always kind of considered them canon and very worth reading, because there's nothing ever in the movies that contradict anything that's going on. And there's a lot of fun that gets had. Like I said, talking about Star Trek getting into alternate realities, Star Trek Boldly Go gets into it. We'll talk about that in a second. But, I mean, there's been times where they've met, like, a female Captain Kirk and a female Spock, where they've crossed over with, like, the Deep Space Nine crew. This is the Kelvin timeline, Chris Pine's Kirk and all that. Really, really, really cool stuff. Initially the comic book, not Boldly Go, but the original Kelvin timeline Star Trek comic, was just doing original series episodes, but with the Kelvin timeline crew. And those are fine too, but then they started getting into very original stories, and it just really took off after that. And it was just a lot of fun. They've done some really great shit. So anyway, Boldly Go, we've reviewed some of the issues in the past of what's been going on. Pretty much since issue 9, we're getting back into where the gang is going to get all together again. Because in Boldly Go, Kirk is not captaining the Enterprise. The Enterprise A is still getting built at Yorktown, at the Yorktown station. And so he's the captain of the USS Endeavour at this point. And his first officer is Sulu. It's actually Hikaru Sulu, Commander Sulu in this case. Spock and Uhura, they're off on New Vulcan. Not Vulcan, because that's destroyed, but New Vulcan. And other characters are kind of all over the place and whatever. And it's so, but we're getting to the point where it seems like the Enterprise A is about to get finished. In fact, there's a whole comic. It's a tremendous issue. I think it might be issue 11 or 12, maybe 10. Maybe it's issue 10, where Scotty is visiting Yorktown Station, and Keenser and Kevin, if you don't know, Kevin's that little, what are they? Not Talaxian, Texian or whatever. Like at the beginning of Star Trek Beyond, those really little creatures that say they're going to eat us. Talk about the Fiborans or whatever, or Fiboans. You see at the end of Star Trek Beyond that, in the beginning of the movie, one of them beams on board the Enterprise with Kirk after they beam Kirk off of that planet, and then at the end of the movie, you see Keenser walking around with another one of these little aliens, these little guys. And it's so fun. I love Keenser. It's so funny because, like, you hear Kirk actually address the little guy saying, "Oh, hey, Kevin." And yeah, that's his name. You find out in the comic book, I think it's in issue 10 of Boldly Go, that his name's Kevin, and he's this whole, like, he's looking to stay with the humans and everything. It's really cute, and he's actually helping Keenser with building the Enterprise A at Yorktown Station. And it's an awesome little comic book. It is so much fucking fun, that the whole issue with Kevin, and Jayla's there. Jayla's been a part of this series. She's in Starfleet Academy, but she's been a part of it, which I'm glad, because one of my complaints is that they ditched the character of Carol Marcus. And I hate that, because I thought that was so cool. I love the actress that they got to play her in Into Darkness. I thought it was an awesome character, and for her to just kind of disappear sucks, in my opinion. One person they're not having disappear, and in fact, I have a theory about this. So the series is very enjoyable. It's really cool. One of the major storyline that they're running now is what's called IDIC, which of course, or IDIC, which IDIC, which stands for, it's a Vulcan concept, which stands for Infinite Diversity and Infinite Combinations, that Gene Roddenberry came up with. And in this, it's another one of these multiverse, alternate universe, storylines. And so you encounter the female Captain Kirk and female Spock and all that again, where the bulk of the crew is actually women. Like even there's a female Chekhov. Her name's Pavela, and you encounter them. You encounter a Captain Kirk who, in another universe, there's so much to talk about this. Who in another universe actually is known as the Orphan, and he's a boy who gets raised by Klingons effectively, and he's this awesome like Klingon commander. He's human, but he works for the Klingons. And then there's the Spock, his name is Simon Grayson, which Grayson, his mother was Amanda Grayson, who has kind of, just shunned his Vulcan heritage. In fact, he even got plastic surgery done to where he doesn't have the ears anymore, and he's like this sort of mixture between Spock and really kind of a Captain Kirk. But his name's Simon Grayson. Tons of fun what they're doing with that. And then of course, you run into the Kelvin Timeline Captain Kirk, who experiences all this. And there's like these android versions of everything. I mean, like it's wild, all the different permutations and ideas that they came up with for the Enterprise and its crew in this APPENDIX storyline. And there's in fact the Orphan, as he's known, again, this human Kirk that works for the Klingons. There's a scene, and this is so great. In fact, I shared it on various social media. There's a scene in the comic, I think it's in issue 13 of Boldly Go, where he's stooping at least 3 Klingon women on board his Klingon ship. And I was like, yeah, fucking right. Because in Star Trek Into Darkness, you have proof that Kirk has a threesome. Okay? I've talked about this many times because there's a point, the 2 gals come out from under the bed and everything, and awesome. Now we know Kirk has had a foursome. Now, this is a point that I bring up a lot. Okay, look, I love Star Wars. This is the reason I do a Star Wars update every month, okay? I'm so passionate about Star Wars. But in the age-old question of not who's better, Kirk or Picard, I'm going to give that to Picard, actually, but in the age-old question, what's better, Star Trek or Star Wars? I think, provably, objectively, Star Trek, on at least some metrics, and really I think it could be any metric, is better than Star Wars. And the reason I say that is that Star Trek is not afraid to explore the entirety of the human condition and explore the entirety of what's a huge part of the human condition, human sexuality. So this is the second time where Star Trek has, in recent memory anyway, where Star Trek has, shown off sexual acts that, frankly, Star Wars never will. I don't think Star Wars is ever going to show. Look, credit to Star Wars for having bisexual characters. We talked about that recently, for having lesbian characters and all that. That's great. I'm not taking anything away from that. I'm just saying Han Solo's, you're never even going to get it. I mean, you might, it would be so, if they suggested it, they would just barely suggest it. Maybe you could argue that Boba Fett in Return of the Jedi in the special edition, when he like touches the chin of one of the dancers in Jabba's palace, that maybe, and all the dancers seem to really like him, that maybe he's had some wild orgies, but it's not really blatant, as to where in issue 13 of Star Trek Boldly Go, it is fucking blatant. Kirk had a foursome. Woo, it's official, baby. And I think that's great. Let's see this kind of action going on. And kudos to Star Trek for having the guts and the balls to show that off. Because Star Wars never will. I think, hey, do it, baby. And show the Klingon tits. In Star Trek Discovery, do it all. Let's get adult, let's get extreme, let's make it happen. And I love the gender bending. Like I really love that there, there's a whole universe where all the characters are just, they're female versions of themselves or whatever, or like Uhura is Uhuro, where she's a man. I think that's fantastic. So on board with that. So a lot of the wild stuff. What's happening in the comic books, like I said, there's that issue with Kevin. There's the APPENDIX series is very interesting. Now, here's the thing. In the APPENDIX series, they make it explicit that Chekhov is still alive, which we knew because, the actor that played Chekhov, sadly died, at a very, very young age. And the movie Star Trek Beyond was dedicated to him, which he was thankfully able to finish. But it was Anton Yeltsin, right? And So anyway, so we knew then that they weren't going to kill off Chekhov. Even though the character or the actor died, they weren't going to kill off the character. Here's what I think would be interesting, and here's what I think is happening. So in the APPENDIX, which is a multi-part, and they're only in like part 2. We're up to issue 14 on Boldly Go. Okay, in issue 14, Chris Pine's Captain Kirk, the Kirk from the Kelvin Timeline, he encounters, like, for whatever reason, there's all the separation and stuff. He encounters Pavella again, which is the female version from this alternate universe of Chekhov. What I think would be really, really cool, okay, is if Pavella ended up, after this APPENDIX storyline happens, this multi-universe storyline happens, that Pavella ends up in the Kelvin timeline and stays there. And so that way, when we get the new Star Trek movie, she's the Chekhov. Or if we never get the new Star Trek movie, if we just get, if Boldly Go just goes for a few more years and we just get Star Trek comic books and novels in the Kelvin timeline, Pavella is the Chekhov for the Kelvin timeline. I think that would be tremendous. I think that'd be fantastic, and I think that's the direction they're going. They haven't said anything, but I get the sense that that's what's going to happen, and that's why they purposely put Pavella with the Kelvin timeline Kirk in the storyline so far. But yeah, awesome storyline, like really cool shit. When you see all the different enterprises and everything, it kind of reminds you of, there's the episodes of The Next Generation where you saw like all the different Enterprise Ds. It's very much like that, but it's super well done in the comic book in Star Trek Boldly Go. I'm telling you, this is one of the best comic book series out there right now. If you're a Star Trek fan, if you're not, I guess maybe it doesn't make as much sense. But if you're a Star Trek fan, there is gold happening with what IDW is doing in that series. So, okay, that's enough of that. The Mirror Broken series that IDW is doing, where it's the Next Generation in the Mirror Universe, I'm not going to review that any further here. I'll wait till the series is done before I review that more, because while some very interesting things are happening, and actually I found out that there is another comic book in that series that was only released through Loot Crate. Like there's an origin story for Data in the within the Mirror Universe. But that comic book was only released if you were a subscriber to Loot Crate. Eventually, I'm sure when they come out with the trade paperback for Mirror Broken, that Data origin story will be in there and it'll be a selling point. But I haven't read that yet. I know the story that gets told, but I haven't really read it. So anyway, I'll wait until all of that is pretty much completed, and then I'll cover that. But what I want to talk about now is something that, frankly, I was crying. I was literally like tears running down my face when I watched this. So the web series Star Trek Continues, that's the name of it, Star Trek Continues, which is trying to be pretty much a season 4 for Star Trek the original series, and I've reviewed every episode on Sovryn Tech since it came out a few years ago. Vic Mignogna and Todd Hackelborn and Michelle Specht, that whole, all of them, incredible. Okay. And like the way that they made it look, the way they've made all of these episodes so far look and feel just like the original series, and the amount of fan service and homage they've paid to so many different aspects of Star Trek has been nothing less than remarkable. I don't think anybody could do better. Vic Mignogna has done an amazing job as Captain Kirk. I've said this over and over again. I'm not going to go over a complete re-review of that entire series. Bottom line, it's phenomenal. It's one of the best things to ever come out because of the internet, really, and it's just amazing. So ever since the tragic court legal battles, we'll say, between Paramount, CBS, and pretty much anybody that makes anything independently for Star Trek, particularly Axanar was one of the how to put this, was the main victim, I guess, of the situation, where Paramount and CBS came down and said, okay, if you want to make a fan film, here are the rules. It can only be 15 minutes long. It can't do this. It can't do that. Like all this crazy shit. Now, when that came out, a lot of people were worried, hey, wait a minute, but we have Star Trek Continues, and this is awesome. And I think Paramount and CBS knew that if they laid down the hammer on Star Trek Continues, there might have been riots on their hands, because this is such a beloved show. I mean, it's crazy, crazy beloved. These easily get, these episodes on YouTube and on Vimeo and however they get presented. I mean, you're talking easily over 1 million views per episode. There's TV shows that would kill for this kind of, this kind of audience. So they let, mysteriously, they were like they weren't part of the legislation. I don't know how they all justified that. But Star Trek Continues was allowed to continue. They were allowed to finish up, as it were, because Star Trek Continues had been funded by Kickstarters, much like Axanar was. And there were certain obligations of of how many episodes they were at least going to make. I think that if those fan film guidelines didn't come down from Paramount and CBS, that Star Trek Continues would have kept going for a while, because I'd help keep funding it. I mean, I get new Star Trek, I mean, now we have Star Trek Discovery as well, but with Star Trek Continues for a while, that was new Star Trek for me. And every time a new episode came out, I mean, it was pure excitement. And look, and I say this every time I review it. My suspension of disbelief, I have no problem believing Vic Mignogna is Captain Kirk. Yeah, I know Shatner's not there. I don't miss it for a second. No, and that's not a slight against Shatner at all. I'm just saying that it's so perfect. It's so picture perfect that there is, I mean, not that Vic even looks like Shatner, okay? It's so perfect that the stories are so good that you accept it. You're like, okay, well, we got new actors. We'll move along. This is fine. We'll deal with it. It's that good. So they finished up with a two-parter. And the two-parter is called To Boldly Go, Part 1 and Part 2. These are episodes 10 and 11, technically, of Star Trek Continues. And they did, the things they did in this were, I mean, I'm almost at a loss for words. I'm getting goosebumps right now. Like, I'm dead serious. I was crying. It was that powerful. What they pulled off. That's huge. I don't remember the last time Star Trek made me cry, unless I'm watching the motion picture of Star Trek 2. Which, speaking of the motion picture, so in this, the storyline pretty much here is that you find out that Section 31, they don't necessarily, they definitely hint that it's Section 31, but they don't say it so much explicitly, but they bring up, Article 14, Section 31 of the Federation Charter or whatever, and that's where Section 31, which is kind of the CIA, the special ops of Starfleet, that's where they get their name from. But you find out Section 31 started a program where they were taking espers, which, if you remember the not the Cage, but the first episode of Star Trek, the original pilot for Star Trek with William Shatner, that being Where No Man Has Gone Before. And that's why it's fitting that this episode's called To Boldly Go, To Boldly Go, Where No Man Has Gone Before. Goes back to that, where Gary Mitchell, the character of Gary Mitchell, which is a friend of Kirk, gets these godlike powers himself and a female doctor in the episode. And Kirk has to take on his best friend at the time, someone who we discover is his best friend, who now has they get the silvery eyes and he has all these godlike powers and everything. And so you find out Section 31 actually wants to take advantage of that. And they start, wanting to create espers. Okay. That's kind of the basic idea. Now, we're not and they call it the Pandora Project or something like that. It's not 100% that Section 31 did it, but you definitely get the hint, especially when they mention the articles. So this is Kirk having to take on what ends up being an entire crew of espers, but definitely has shades of Space Seed, taking on Khan, right? Oh, that's another thing in the IDIC, the Boldly Go IDIC comic book. At the end of issue 14, spoiler alert, there's a female Khan. Fuck yes. This is going to be so hot. Anyway, sorry. Okay, let's continue. So it had shades of that, where he's taking on this, because one of the main characters, kind of the main villain, a human woman who is an esper and has the silver eyes and everything, she's making the case that humans haven't evolved. Why are we humans are no different than the Cro-Magnons still. Why are we bothered? We need to move forward. We need to get to the next level and everything. A message I could certainly appreciate. And it was... So, the storyline, kind of that whole battle, and again, it goes over 2 parts, and, you end up with Constitution class versus Constitution class, because these espers take over. Esper stands for ESP. Those are the people, they come in contact with the barrier at the edge of the galaxy that will, cause like humans to kind of awaken. In fact, this was interesting. They make the claim, there's so many cool little like you've got to listen to every line in these 2 episodes because there's so many cool little hints at things. Like there's a point where the main Esper character, she says that, why do you think the preservers put the barrier around the galaxy in the first place? And it was like, wait, the preservers did that? Now the preservers, that you have to go back to the Obelisk. There's an original series episode where you find out about the preservers and everything. That was really slick. And in fact, I think that was even mentioned in a Shatnerverse novel, which I've talked about that before as well. Other great Star Trek novels to read are the entire Shatnerverse, which is the books written by William Shatner, where Captain Kirk kind of survives the events of Star Trek Generations and ends up in the 24th century. There's a book written by William Shatner called Preserver, and I think in that they mentioned that they put up the barrier. And so the argument gets made is that the reason that this barrier was put up at the edge of the galaxy was so that when humans got to it and they were ready to leave the galaxy, the preservers, they would be enhanced. Like they would get these godlike powers so that they could survive going to other galaxies. I mean, really, really cool little ideas that just constantly get dropped in this, in this 2-part episode. In fact, there's a point where, because they're saying, how are we going to defeat these espers? I mean, they're like gods. And they reference what happened with Gary Mitchell, and Kirk says, this is hilarious. This is perfect. This is such attention to detail. And I don't know if everybody caught it. He said, they're not gods. They still have human failings. He said, even Gary, and he says, he even got my middle name wrong. Which, if you don't know what that means, so in the episode where No Man Has Gone Before, there is a point where Gary Mitchell creates this grave for Captain Kirk, because he's going to kill him. And on the gravestone, on the tombstone, it says James R. Kirk, not James T., as in James Tiberius Kirk. It says James R. Kirk. And everybody used to joke about that. I mean, pretty much just they hadn't decided what Kirk's middle name was at the time. That's the real answer for it. It's just a production issue. Okay, but they gave it a canon reason, is that, well, Gary Mitchell, just wasn't in his right mind, and he put R instead of T. I mean, that's talk about deep cut. That is such a deep cut. That is such fan service. Oh man, when he said that, and he says it under his breath, and I'm just like, oh, that's brilliant. Nice. It was so cool. So yeah, and you get tremendous starship battles in this. In fact, there's you get the Romulan subcommander, or the Romulan commander, sorry, from the season 3 episode of the original series, the Enterprise incident. Okay. She comes back, and so you get this, you have a Romulan bird of prey in the 2-parter, that you get spaceship battles with that, and a couple of Constitution class ships. I mean, this is like high action, tons of intense action. In fact, because they never gave a name to the Romulan commander, the female Romulan commander in the Enterprise incident, but the actress, Joanne Linville, they got her granddaughter to play that Romulan commander character. They got Joanne Linville's granddaughter. Holy fuck. I mean, just again, the fan service, the homage, the respect to the franchise is unparalleled what they were doing in this. It was amazing. So tremendous action. You couldn't ask for better. And what was really cool, especially when you get into To Boldly Go Part 2 in episode 11 here, what happens is you notice there starts to be musical changes. And there's changes even in the way that warp drive is engaged in. Now, the musical changes start to bring on the instrument that Jerry Goldsmith pretty much invented for Star Trek The Motion Picture, to do the V'ger theme, where it's like that, it's like this really weird, electronic sound. So that was an instrument that Jerry Goldsmith, he pretty much invented that. And I mean, that's just how great of a musician that Jerry Goldsmith was. Definitely one of the greatest composers in history. And they start using tones of that music, like that, and all that stuff in episode 11 of Star Trek Continues to start to lead you into what you're going to be hearing in Star Trek The Motion Picture. Very slick. Like I said, also the warp drive effect. They changed the warp drive effect to where it looks like where the light is kind of passing, or, like lights from, say, the C deck of the Enterprise sort of like phase back when it goes into warp. They started doing that. I mean, like a lot of these little hints. Then eventually you meet Admiral Nagura, which Admiral Nagura, you find out in Star Trek The Motion Picture. Of course, that's pretty much my favorite movie ever of anything, Admiral Nagura, you find out, is like this, real asshole in Star Trek The Motion Picture that is very difficult to do anything with. And you get it. You get this really gruff Asian guy, playing Admiral Nagura. And, you have this whole conversation with him. And when you first see Admiral Nagura, you see him wearing a uniform that looks very much like, what they call the pajama uniform, or the pajama uniforms from Star Trek The Motion Picture, which I love. They're some of my favorite Starfleet uniforms because I like the luxuriousness and kind of the laid backness and everything of them. And so you get the hints of that. So you're starting, like, right away. Once you get into part 2, especially, they start building you up to where they're leading you into Star Trek The Motion Picture. So you're bridging the original series show with the vastly different visual style that Star Trek The Motion Picture brought on, mainly because, it's a movie and it had a movie budget instead of a television budget from the 60s, okay? And it was 10 years later, right? As far as production, not within the universe itself. So that was so cool to get, to create that bridge between the two. So now at the end of it, the Enterprise, in this battle with the Espers and their Constitution class ship, which is actually the USS Congo, the Enterprise gets wrecked. I mean, and it's painful to watch because, I mean, they are like, it's an awesome starship battle. And so the Enterprise has to go back. It goes back to Earth and it goes into dry dock. The dry dock where you find it in Star Trek The Motion Picture being completely refit. And with the ship so wrecked from the battle, you get the good excuse as to why it went through a complete refit, and why it ends up, why it took so long to refit it and everything, which is a major plot point in Star Trek The Motion Picture. So, I mean, it's just perfect. Every little thing that they were doing with it. And then you get and this is important. There's a couple important points to this. Then you get where Kirk, is really like the 5-year mission just took such a toll on him that he's like, look, I'm done. You know what? Put me behind a desk. I'll be an admiral. And he takes on the, becoming an admiral, which is how you first meet him in Star Trek The Motion Pictures. He's Admiral Kirk, not Captain Kirk. And he puts on the uniform from Star Trek The Motion Picture, the whole thing, the white and black, or kind of that white and gray uniform. And he gives a whole speech about how he's stepping down from commanding the Enterprise, and he's going to be, head of or chief of, Starfleet operations and whatever, as an admiral. And he gives just this awesome speech about how Starfleet's going to rebuild, Starfleet's going to do this, all of which also makes, even like, because he's talking about throughout the storyline, you're finding out about how all these Constitution class ships are getting destroyed. A lot of these other things happen, like it's really taken a toll, and Starfleet is really affected by a lot of what's been going on, which just makes sense because Discovery is talking about this massive Klingon Federation war where just at the Battle of the Binary Stars, what do they lose? Like 30 ships? Or, they lose a lot. And then you're losing so many Constitution class ships, and, and that takes a toll on Kirk. And then, in Star Trek The Motion Picture, when you find out that, hey, the Enterprise, even though it's not completely finished, it's the only ship in range that can go after V'ger. You would think, well, wait a minute, doesn't Starfleet have hundreds of ships? What the fuck? Why is the Enterprise the only ship that can go after V'ger? That's because, Starfleet's in shambles right now. And and really the only thing keeping it, from the Klingons attacking them is, again, what I mentioned earlier, the Organian peace treaty. Like just the amount of thought and the way that they tied all these loose ends. I know technically Star Trek Continues isn't canon, but it's going to be canon for me until I get proven otherwise, because it is so well done. Like, and it was just brilliant, all the stuff that they put together. Not even that, but in Admiral Nagura's office, when Kirk is visiting him in his office, there's a point where he walks along, kind of just like Kirk did in Star Trek Into Darkness in the Kelvin Timeline, where he's in Admiral Marcus's room. There's all these starships, all these model starships like lined up around the office. And what was really cool was it starts with the Phoenix, much like it did in Admiral Marcus's office, but again, we're in Admiral Nagura's office here. Okay, you see the Phoenix, then it might have been the XCV-330 there. You see the NX-01, Captain Archer's ship, right? You see that, and then the Discovery's there. The USS Discovery from Star Trek Discovery is one of the ships in the line. And then at the end of it, you see what a refitted Constitution class would end up looking like, which is what the Enterprise would eventually end up looking like throughout the throughout its 6 movies. Oh man, perfect. Adding a Discovery too, you can't beat it. That was so cool. I mean, that was so cool. The way that they bridged everything. And then you find out, wait a minute, why did Spock leave Starfleet and why did he go off, to practice Kulinar, which is, again, how you find him in Star Trek The Motion Picture. You find out why that happened. And pretty much my favorite character and one of my favorite things done with the entirety of the Star Trek Continues series was done by the beautiful and just super talented Michelle Specht. She played the character of Dr. Elise McKenna, who is, she was introduced, she's a ship's counselor, which, that concept wouldn't come up till the Next Generation, but you find out that this is kind of a pilot program, like the pilot counselor program, they're calling it, where ships have a ship's counselor. And she has been an awesome character throughout the entirety of the Star Trek Continues series. Just stunning. And spoiler alerts, folks, they kill her off. And like they kind of, there's been this little hint, this little buildup of a relationship between Spock and Dr. McKenna. And they kill her off. And it's a beautiful moment where she's like held, they're trying to rescue her from the ship of the Espers, and they can't keep her pattern in the transporter. There's another beautiful point to that. They can't keep her pattern in the transporter, and they couldn't, they just couldn't bring her back on board. And so she's like stuck in the transporter buffer for a little while, just like there, and you can't hear what she's saying, but she's like saying goodbyes to like Kirk and especially to Spock, and she dies. In the transporter. It's a beautiful moment. It's another moment where just, once again, man, I had tears falling. I was like, oh, fuck, that was awesome. I mean, like, it was beautiful the way they did that. And, what was also really cool about that was that it lent itself to two things. One is that it lent itself to how in Star Trek The Motion Picture, one of the first tragedies that happens in that movie is you find out that there's a transporter malfunction that ends up killing Commander Sonak. In the very, very early on in the film. So yeah, there's, it explains that transporters can have very real problems. So kind of a main thing that I'm saying here, a main theme throughout this entire 2-parter is that Star Trek Continues really bridges you. It takes you from the original series all the way to the motion picture, and it explains everything and leads right into the motion picture. It does it just so well. The other nice thing, though, is that there's the chance that one could argue that that Dr. McKenna could come back and that they could have saved her pattern in the main computer in the buffer, which is exactly what in the 6th season episode of The Next Generation, in the episode Relics, when Scotty comes back into the 24th century, you find out he stored his pattern in the buffer of the or maybe it's the SS of the Janolan anyway. And like the claim could get made that they did that with Dr. McKenna, and maybe that they could bring her back at some point. So there's still a chance that that character could come back if they ever do anything with Star Trek Continues. I would love it if they did. I thought this was fantastic. This was so well done. There's genuine heart-wrenching moments. There's incredible action, awesome starship battles, a lot of really heartfelt stuff going on. There's a great tie-in with an episode that I think gets overlooked. I think the pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, really gets overlooked. And They did a tremendous job with that. And there's the character of Smith, who's also a newer female character that Star Trek Continues brought on, where they bring up something really interesting with her and they tie her into the larger canon. There's just so many cool things that get done with this. It's a mini masterpiece. Straight up, it's a mini masterpiece. It's just one of the best. It's great Star Trek. Bottom line, it's great Star Trek. And it does an incredible job of leading us into the Star Trek the Motion Picture, which is, again, my favorite 2 hours of Star Trek, bar none. Like, I love Star Trek the Motion Picture. It's so cool. And for this to pay so much fealty to it, just made it all the better, really. I mean, it was fantastic. And it just, you need to watch this. If you've never watched Star Trek Continues at all, watch the whole goddamn thing. You are in for such a treat. Definitely now my favorite episode of Star Trek Continues. Before, my favorite episode was probably Lolani, what that had to do with the Orion woman. That was topping my list. And then the Mirror Mirror episode they did was really cool. Or was it Fairest of them All that they called it? That was super well done. But this is, Satan blessed us with Star Trek Continues. That's all I can say about it. This is so important. This is such a beautiful thing to get done. I could only hope, I'll call it straight. I don't have the time right now. In the next year, who knows what could happen? Things could change dramatically. But if I could make, like Sovereign Universe content like this, full video, the whole thing, boy, I'd do that in a heartbeat. And this would be the template that I would work off of, because these guys, guys and gals and whatever, they did it right. They did it so right. This is real serious Star Trek. If you have not been pleased with Star Trek Discovery, trust me, Star Trek Continues will please you. And, oh, man. Anyway, so it's sad to see the show go, but it's amazing for it to have such a, to quote a line from Star Trek the Motion Picture, to have such a top brass send-off. And it really did. It's perfection. It's just perfection. Any little oddities or maybe somebody thinks like that the acting was a little rough at some points or something like that. I don't agree with you. In fact, so one of my complaints actually had been that I thought Todd Hackleborn, who I know is a great guy, that his Spock wasn't exactly up to snuff. He hit it. He hit his stride in this. He did such a great Spock, and you felt what Spock was feeling so many times, and yeah, he's feeling so many times in this. It's just magnificent. Star Trek is coming out with whether it's from Paramount and CBS or IDW or the fans, Star Trek is coming out with some of its best work in history right now. It is such an exciting time to be a Star Trek fan. It's crazy exciting to be a Star Trek fan right now. You have just a wealth of things, and hell, even on the merchandising side. I'm looking at my refitted NX-01 right now, and it's just stunning. Even on the merchandising side, all the way around, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's amazing what's happening. So if you love Star Trek like me, man, I raise my glass to you, because we're having a great time right now. So anyway, that is it. That's enough for this Star Trek update. I will see you on the other side. And like the last episode of Star Trek Continues says at the very last slide after the credits, the human adventure is just beginning.